Welcome back, and here's the question. Would you be more likely to vote in Sarasota city elections if they were held in the fall when we vote for president or governor or senator? Right now, city elections are held in the spring when turnout is usually a pathetic 15 to 23% of registered voters. Turnout in the fall is usually 50 to 70%. Supporters of the latest effort to move the election maintain it would make sense. It also saves money. One election in every year, a novel idea. Critics say if city elections are moved to the fall, well, we'll lose the unique attention we give to the city commission races, and they will be swallowed up by the presidential and governor races in the off year. Joining us for more is Public Defender Larry Eager, who is spearheading the latest effort. Kevin Cooper, the president of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. John Severini, one of the ranked choice voting committee of Sarasota, who is opposing moving the elections, and ABC 7 reporter Adam Cellini. And John, let me welcome you to that trapezoid, as we say. What is your main reason for opposing moving the elections?
Well, I agree with the premise of bringing more people out to vote. Democracy is better served with that. I oppose it because the moving to November would require an August primary. August is not a good month to have a primary in Sarasota.
That's when we have primaries anyway.
And right now your primaries are attended by about 20% voter participation. So you're not really increasing your voter turnout in the election that decides who the candidates are going to be. I think it defeats the purpose of bringing more people to the polls in November when the candidates are decided by a minority of the population.
Kevin, you're shaking your head.
But that's just not true. If you read the ballot language that we've put forward, what it shows is that city commissioners can only be elected in November. So you would have August primaries if certain numbers of candidates qualify for the election. So you would have a primary like you do in normal elections now, but you would have the actual election take place, the general election, in November of even number of years. So you would, while you would have the primary where you have equal or greater turnout, by the way, in the last primary election in 2016, what you saw was a couple hundred extra ballots turned in than you saw in the 2015 city election just prior to it, a few months prior. So this is not the case. You would see the strongest number of turnout in November when you actually elect city commissioners.
Larry, we've been down this road before. There have been a number of attempts to move the election to the fall. It's defeated every single time. So on one hand, haven't Sarasota residents spoken on this issue? What's the point of trying to do it again?
Well, I could agree with you if this issue were brought before the voters before. Unfortunately, it has been diluted with so many other issues contained in it, so that I think that we've never really addressed the simple issue of moving the election. We've confused the issue by including matters regarding the composition of the city commission, whether there would be a weak or moderate or strong mayor. None of these things are included in this initiative.
Adam, what is the politics of this? Because after all, the city commission races are nonpartisan. You don't have Republicans running against Democrats, but word is a lot of Democrats do not want the city to move the elections because primarily Democrats do get elected to the city commission.
Certainly, you know, a conspiracy out there. I think, you know, Larry said it, that I think this does get muddled, and what we have to remember is even what we're talking about right now is not moving the elections to the fall. It's more putting that referendum out for voters to decide, and it seems like you know, the conversation heats up every time it's something like this is brought forward. What's being brought forward is you know, the referendum of letting the voters decide if they want elections to move from the spring to the fall. And you know, it's come to a petition because you know, city commissioners have voted it down in the past. So you know, those are questions that really only city commissioners can answer. They give you the reasons, but yeah, I'm not sure exactly.
What about that, John? Why not just let voters decide themselves if they want to come and vote for these city races during the fall or not?
Fair enough. I don't object to that. What I do want is I want the voter to be well informed, and I don't think the voter is being well informed. In 2007, the city of Sarasota passed a referendum, got on the ballot. 77% of the population voted in favor of ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting will do a lot of what these gentlemen are trying to accomplish.
Kevin.
And it has many other benefits besides, and I'll explain that.
There's nothing about this initiative at all that is against ranked choice voting. Here's the thing with ranked choice voting. Number one, it is not allowed by the state yet. So you need to wait for the state to allow for it to happen. Even though it's in our city charter, it cannot happen yet. But the other thing is these aren't mutually exclusive conversations. Ranked choice voting can happen in November when you have the highest number of voters turning out.
Okay, we are just getting warmed up on this topic, moving city elections to the fall. Right after, we'll have more right after we look at the first late weather. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about the latest effort to move city elections in Sarasota from the spring to the fall. And joining us for more is Public Defender Larry Eager, who is spearheading this latest effort. Kevin Cooper, the president of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. John Severini of the Ranked Choice Voting Committee of Sarasota, who opposes moving the elections. And ABC7 reporter Adam Cellini. Larry, I'm going to start with you because some of the other opponents to move the election sent us this very tidy list of reasons why not. And when I look over it, one of the most compelling reasons is that city races have vigorous debates on unique issues to Sarasota. And if you have these elections in a presidential year or when there's a governor's race or a high-profile Senate race, it kind of just gets swallowed up. And why not have an election when our own issues take center stage?
Well, there are a number of responses that I can give to that, but I think the one that directly impacts me, and I had an opportunity to speak with you briefly about this, it may resonate with some, but when you look at, I'm the elected public defender for the 12th Judicial Circuit. When I ran for office, I'm now in my third term, but when I ran, my predecessor was there for a number of years, and to even educate the general public that the public defender's race even existed and that I was an elected official, it fell upon my shoulders to campaign, to go out, to canvass, and to raise the issue. So for me personally, it kind of falls on deaf ears. Even now, when it comes down to it, the public defender's race, as compared to the city commission, is not nearly as relevant for the local population as it is for, as I said, my race.
Well, Larry, doesn't that, you're actually, you're exasperating the problem by moving it to November.
No,
what you're saying is in March you can't get any spotlight. Well, you're going to move it to November and compete with national elections.
Then you can make the argument that my election then should be on a special date as well. And then we said every single election.
That's the same point. Isn't the presidential election important enough? Isn't the Senate race important enough? Isn't county commission important enough? Shouldn't we just have an election every week, Alan? If that's the point, if all these things are important enough that they deserve their own spotlight, why would we ever have any elections on the same ballot at any point in time? It's really a false choice of saying this. And the other part of it is, it kind of presents this, the voters are stupid. You've got doctors, lawyers, teachers, TV anchormen. They can't simply manage to navigate this ballot. How could they ever do it if we don't separate it? It's insulting to the voters. It's insulting to the process.
We know how it does go. If you think back to last November and the ballot that we faced, you had the presidential race up top, you had a U.S. Senate race, but you also had so many judges and ballot questions that many people, when they get down to the bottom part of the ballot, they don't know who the judge candidates are, and they don't know
who decides that, Alan.
They get exhausted.
Him? Who decides who they know? Do you take a test when you enter the ballot to be able to decide what you know and what you don't know? You never know what the voters go into and how they decide. And nor is it important really what they decide and how they decide. They might decide because they like someone's one policy here, one policy there. They get to decide. We do not know going into the vote what people know. It's all speculation. It's all conjecture. And I would submit to you that this down ballot fall off you just mentioned, it is nonlinear. People bounce around. They might start at the top, might stop at 2, 3, and 4, come back at 5, go down 6, 7, 8, come back at 9. They make educated decisions about where they vote and why they vote based on what's important for them, and that is their prerogative as a voter.
John, it was pointed out to me a little bit earlier that the city of Gainesville also just voted to move their elections from the spring to the fall, and it was done almost without a whimper. I mean, doesn't it make sense from that perspective?
Alan, we think ranked choice voting is a much better process. When is less important.
Explain that simply, because many people may not understand what you're talking about.
City of Sarasota approved. 12 cities around the country do it now. There are 40 other cities looking at ranked choice voting. In one election, you get to select multiple candidates. Your first choice, if it's mayor, you can choose multiple, your first, second, third, fourth choices. So if your first choice is eliminated, your second choice replaces it. And if it was a presidential election, you're allowed to vote for Jill Stein as, if that was your party of choice, but then you could pick one of the major candidates as a backup choice, knowing Jill is not going to get elected. So it allows people to vote their heart, their conscience, without wasting a vote.
But is that a
democracy is better served by
issue than whether or not the election is in the spring or the fall?
This is exactly
It is.
This is exactly the problem with the previous times that we have addressed the issue of moving the vote. We have diluted the issue with other issues. I don't know the ranked voting program and policies well enough to have an informed opinion on it, but it certainly seems that that could be incorporated regardless of when you have the vote. And again, when you have the vote, we're trying to maximize participation by the electorate. I want to expand and to be as inclusive as possible in bringing people to the ballot box.
And the interesting thing is, here we sit, kind of halfway into this panel, we're talking about the merits of whether or not to move it and why it makes sense to move it. And the vigorous debate that we might be having almost validates the question of, should voters have the opportunity to say whether or not they want to move it? Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to give voters the opportunity to decide the date.
Right.
And so doesn't all of this, Alan, lead back to the point of all of this, reasonable minds might disagree. You have all these points on one side, Doesn't that reasonably push the option to the voters, should it not?
Adam, the other thing I hear in terms of the uniqueness of Sarasota municipal elections is, in this city, the neighborhood associations have a lot of influence. If you're going to run for city commission, you better meet the people who are involved with these neighborhood associations. And the question would be, if you move these elections, are you basically taking away the unique way that you have to campaign for office in the city of Sarasota?
That has come up, in speaking with Janet Hirn-Koch. She didn't mention the neighborhood specifically, but she did mention the aspect of going door to door and campaigning for your election that is coming up. And the fact of the matter is, and Larry mentioned, that it falls on deaf ears because he had to work hard to educate people not only about himself but about his election. But the fact of the matter is, it is a special election right now. If you are a candidate, if you plan on being a candidate, why would you ever want it to change? And I think that's why we see these things kind of get killed, at the commission table where they have to approve a referendum. That's why we're seeing a petition out there, possibly because it is easier as a candidate for money, for campaigning, knocking on doors. It does appear easier that way.
I know you have a response to that, but I have a question, and and that's what we're here for. When we talk about so many different things, we always wonder what the politics of it, what the partisan politics of it. And on one hand, we know that the city of Sarasota elections are nonpartisan in nature, but nothing is nonpartisan. We asked about the advantage in terms of how many Democrats feel about this. But the same question goes to Republicans, because there's been criticism that the race for governor is an off-year elections, and traditionally fewer Democrats vote in the midterms than they do during the presidential years. So would both of you be supportive of moving the governor's election to the presidential year, again, to maximize the number of people who are coming out?
To answer that, personally, having not really given a whole lot of thought to the subject, but to maintain some level of intellectual integrity, yes, absolutely. If we maximize the number of people who participate in the voting process to legitimize whoever gets elected, I'm in favor of it.
Kevin?
Yeah, I think there's a substantial benefit to staggered terms, where you see elections every 2 years, so you have staggered terms in the House. But in terms of a gubernatorial race where you don't need to worry about staggered terms, absolutely. Bring the vote to the voters. We know where they are. Let's bring it to them.
John, it's really kind of hard to argue about that.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue that. I agree. Democracy is better served when more people participate. There are better ways to get people to participate. The state of Oregon has a mandatory mail-in ballot. Everybody gets mailed a ballot. They get 80% voter participation. Make it easy for the voters. Along with that ballot, they get information on each of the candidates. It's a much better system. I suggest to these gentlemen, there are other ways to get people to cast their votes.
And going back to the partisan thing, I think when you were talking to Adam about it, when you look back in 2017, there wasn't just a spring election for the city of Sarasota. You had a spring election for the town of Longboat Key. And in March of 2017, you had a spring election for the city of Sarasota, and the turnout was just over 19%. You had an election in Longboat Key that reached almost 60%. We would not be talking about this as partisan or when you have it if turnout was where it needed to be, and that's why it's an issue.
Okay, we have to take a quick break, and we'll be back for final thoughts in a moment. Stay with us. And our guest joining us right now for final thoughts. And John, I'm going to start with you. In 40 seconds or less, make your case to keep these elections exactly where they are now.
Sure. Alan, I think Sarasota is in a unique position here. You can focus on local candidates. Keeping them in March allows people to just block out all the background noise, focus on what's going on locally, which I think is very important to them, and it takes the partisanship out of it. You move it to a general year election, it's going to get partisan. I think people are just tired of partisan politics. Keep it nonpartisan, keep it where it is, focus on, let the focus be local.
You know, Kevin, I've heard this criticism before when we have talked about even school board races in Sarasota County, that they are becoming such big money races that, you know, there are candidates who are raising tens of thousands of dollars for a school committee race, and that is part of the problem. Instead of keeping these races small budget, you know, old-time politics where you have to really basically knock on doors and shake hands.
Sure, yeah, but nothing about the proposal in front of this right now is about campaign finance. What they can do in March and May right now, they'll be able to do in August and November of even number years. There's absolutely no difference in the campaign finance laws that we're suggesting, nor would we. And so here's the real issue is, do we want to hold elections when there is the highest level of voter engagement? And do we want to give voters the opportunity to decide on that? Go to decidethedate.com, read it for yourself, get educated, and understand the issue. We can look around here right now and what we see. The city of Northport does this. What they see is 60% voter turnout. When the city of Venice holds their elections for city commissioners in November of even number of years, they see 70% turnout. Mayor John Hollick, reelected with a 70% turnout. Do voters want that in Sarasota?
Larry, what do you have to do now? How many signatures do you need on this petition?
He's the numbers guy. I'm just here for
where does it go from here?
We are in the process of collecting the signatures necessary. We have 180 days. The clock starts when we filed. I don't have the numbers that we have. I know that we have earmarked. We're pacing ourselves, and we look like we're on track. But it is a long and laborious task. It is the validation of the signatures that we have to go through that does slow the process and does make it costly.
Well, I'll tell you where we are right now. We have hundreds of petitions signed by registered City of Sarasota voters. We have organizations like the Sarasota chapter of the NAACP, the Sarasota chapter of the ACLU that are signing on board and endorsing this campaign because what they see is voter enfranchisement is critical to a representative democracy in this community.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight. FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired, just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank our guests for being here tonight. Larry Eager is spearheading the effort, and Kevin Cooper is the president of the Greater Sarasota Chamber of Commerce. John Savarini is with the Ranked Choice Voting Committee of Sarasota, who is opposing moving the elections, and ABC7 reporter Adam Cellini.